Berkshire, England, March 1820. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the east drawing room of Carrington Hall, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny witnesses to the scene unfolding below. Lady Lavinia Carrington stood frozen before the tall windows, her fingers clutching a letter that trembled, despite her desperate attempt at composure. 3 months. The words burned into her consciousness like a brand. Tobias had only 3 months remaining before his return to America, before he vanished from her life forever, unless she made an impossible choice. Behind her, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the marble corridor. Her mother's voice, sharp with barely concealed triumph, called out her name. The Viscount had arrived, no doubt prepared to press for an answer to his proposal, while her parents stood ready to accept on her behalf, if necessary. Lavinia pressed her palm against the cool glass, watching the gardens below where, in just a few hours, she would meet Tobias in their secret place. The man she loved, the man she could never acknowledge, the man who had asked her to abandon everything for a future that society would condemn as madness. If stories of love that defies every rule of society move your heart, subscribe now and join us on this journey. You will not want to miss what happens next. The predicament that held Lavinia Carrington captive in her drawing room had begun 2 years earlier, though she had not recognized it as such at the time. The spring of 1818 had brought an unusual addition to the household staff at Carrington Hall, a young American gentleman named Tobias Brigham, sent by his wealthy uncle in Boston to learn the refined protocols of English service before assuming management of the family's transatlantic shipping concerns. Baron Carrington, Lavinia's father, had agreed to the arrangement as a favor to an old business associate. The young American would serve as a footman, learning discipline and propriety, while secretly preparing for a future far grander than his temporary position suggested. It was an arrangement that satisfied all parties, at least initially. Lavinia had paid little attention to the new servant at first. At 20 years of age, she had just completed her second London season with disappointing results. Her mother, Lady Caroline Carrington, had expressed increasing concern about her daughter's prospects, particularly as the family's income of £4,000 annually, while respectable, hardly positioned them among the most desirable matches in the marriage market. "You must be more engaging, Lavinia," her mother had counseled repeatedly during their return journey to Berkshire. "Smile more. Demonstrate your accomplishments. You cannot afford to be overlooked for a third season." The criticism stung, though Lavinia accepted it with outward grace. She knew her duty to her family, understood the expectations placed upon daughters of the gentry. Marriage was not about romance, but about securing one's future and elevating one's family connections. Love was a luxury afforded only in novels and poems, not in the practical realities of English society. Or so she had believed, until a chance encounter in the library changed everything. It had been a rainy October afternoon, nearly 6 months after Tobias's arrival at Carrington Hall. The steady drumming of rain against the windows created a soothing rhythm that seemed to isolate the library from the rest of the house. Lavinia had retreated to this sanctuary seeking solitude, only to discover the young American footman carefully replacing books on the upper shelves, his movements precise and unexpectedly graceful for a man of his considerable height and build. The scent of old leather bindings mingled with beeswax polish, creating an atmosphere of scholarly comfort. "Forgive me, my lady," he had said immediately upon noticing her presence, preparing to depart. "I did not realize anyone was here. I shall complete this task later." His voice carried traces of something distinctly different from the accents she had grown accustomed to hearing, a slight flattening of vowels that marked him as unmistakably American. The sound arrested her attention in a way she had not anticipated. "You need not leave on my account," Lavinia had replied, struck by something in his accent that made the common English phrases sound somehow distinct. "I merely came to select something to read. Please continue your work. I should not wish to disrupt the proper organization of the collection." She had turned toward the shelves of novels, attempting to appear absorbed in her selection, but the unusual cadence of his speech had piqued her curiosity in a way she could not quite explain. "Might I assist you in your selection, my lady?" Tobias had inquired after several minutes of silence. "I have had the liberty of arranging these volumes, and have become somewhat familiar with their contents. The conversation that followed should have been brief and impersonal. Instead, it extended for nearly an hour as Tobias revealed an unexpected breadth of knowledge about literature, history, and particularly about America, a land that fascinated Lavinia with its promise of new beginnings and different possibilities. "Is it truly so different from England?" she had asked, abandoning all pretense of maintaining proper distance between mistress and servant. "In Boston, my lady, what matters is the work of a man's hands, not the name of his grandfather," he had replied, his blue eyes brightening with quiet conviction. "A man may build his own future there, rather than inheriting one." The words had resonated with something deep within Lavinia's heart, though she could not have articulated why at the time. She only knew that when she finally left the library that afternoon, she carried with her not only a novel, but also the first stirrings of a connection that would ultimately threaten to destroy the carefully ordered world her parents had constructed for her. The encounters continued, always innocent in appearance yet increasingly significant in impact. Tobias proved remarkably well read for a servant, though Lavinia gradually came to understand that his status as a footman was temporary and somewhat artificial. He shared stories of Boston, of the Atlantic crossing, of a society where rigid class distinctions held less power over individual destinies. "You speak of America as though it were paradise," Lavinia observed one afternoon in late winter, after months of these secret conversations in the library. "Surely it has its own troubles and limitations." "Indeed it does, my lady," Tobias conceded, his expression growing serious. "But its troubles are different in nature. There, a man's worth is not predetermined by the title he inherits or fails to inherit. There, a woman of intelligence and spirit might hope for more than simply marrying well." The words hung in the air between them, charged with implications neither dared to acknowledge directly. They had crossed some invisible boundary in their discourse, moving from safe topics of literature and geography into more dangerous territory concerning personal aspirations and societal constraints. "You return soon, do you not?" Lavinia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "To America, I mean, to assume your uncle's business." "In June," Tobias confirmed, and something in his tone made Lavinia's heart constrict painfully. "I have learned what I came to learn here. Now I must return and apply those lessons to building something of my own." The approaching separation lent their subsequent interactions an urgency that neither could deny. The library meetings became more frequent, stretching into the evening hours when the household staff had retired and Lavinia could claim to be absorbed in her reading. They spoke of everything and nothing, sharing thoughts and dreams that proper society would have condemned as wildly inappropriate. It was inevitable, perhaps, that friendship would deepen into something more dangerous. The precise moment of transformation eluded easy definition. Was it the evening when Tobias had reached past her to retrieve a volume from a high shelf, and their hands had touched briefly, sending an unexpected shock of awareness through her entire being? Or perhaps it was the afternoon when he had shared a passage from a book of American poetry, his voice low and intimate, and she had realized she was memorizing not the words, but the cadence of his speech. By spring of 1819, Lavinia could no longer deceive herself about the nature of her feelings. She was in love with an American footman, a man impossibly beyond the boundaries of acceptable attachment. The realization terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. The transformation in their relationship accelerated one May evening when Lavinia, unable to sleep, had ventured into the gardens for air and discovered Tobias there, equally restless. The night air carried the perfume of night-blooming jasmine, heavy and intoxicating. Moonlight cast silver shadows across the carefully manicured lawns, creating an atmosphere of unreality that loosened the constraints they had maintained so carefully indoors. She could hear the distant hoot of an owl, the rustle of small creatures in the undergrowth, the pounding of her own heart as she recognized his silhouette against the darker shapes of the hedgerows. "I should not be here," Lavinia had said, though she made no move to return to the house. Her voice emerged barely above a whisper, as though speaking louder might shatter the fragile enchantment of the moment. "If anyone were to see us together, alone in the gardens at night, it would create a terrible scandal. My reputation would be destroyed utterly. "I know," Tobias had replied, his voice rough with emotions he no longer attempted to conceal. The pale light illuminated his face, revealing the struggle between duty and desire written plainly in his expression. "I should send you back to the house immediately. It is my duty to protect your reputation even from myself, especially from myself." But neither had moved. The space between them felt charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. The rational voice in Lavinia's mind screamed warnings, reminded her of every social rule she was violating, catalogued the potential consequences of this midnight encounter. Yet her feet remained rooted to the ground, her eyes locked with his, her entire being drawn toward him by a force stronger than propriety or prudence. Instead, they had stood facing each other in the silver darkness, all pretense finally stripped away, acknowledging what they had been denying for months. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words and suppressed longing. "This is madness," Lavinia had whispered. "You are leaving. I'm expected to marry well. We have no future together. Every practical consideration argues against this feeling." "I know that too," Tobias had said, stepping closer. "I have reminded myself of my place, of your station and mine, of the impossibility of our situation. Yet none of it seems to matter when I am near you." The first kiss had been inevitable, a collision of everything they had been suppressing. When Tobias finally pulled away, his expression reflected the same mixture of joy and despair that Lavinia felt churning in her own heart. "What are we to do?" she had asked, though she knew no answer existed that would satisfy both her heart and her duty. "I do not know," he had admitted, "but I cannot regret this, even though I know I should, even though I know the pain it will cause us both when I must leave." That conversation had opened floodgates neither could close. The garden meetings became regular occurrences, stolen moments where they could be simply Lavinia and Tobias, freed temporarily from the constraints of lady and servant. They shared kisses and whispered promises, both knowing that reality would ultimately reassert itself with devastating force. The summer of 1819 had passed in a fever dream of secret meetings and increasing desperation. Tobias's departure date loomed ever closer, yet neither could bring themselves to end what they had begun. They spoke occasionally of impossible solutions, wild plans that withered under the harsh light of practical examination. "Come with me," Tobias had urged one night in late August, holding her close in the shadowed alcove of the garden where they met. "Come to America. We could build a life there together, away from these rigid hierarchies." "How?" Lavinia had asked, torn between longing and reason. "I have no money of my own. I cannot simply disappear. My parents would be disgraced. They would search for me, bring me back by force if necessary. Then I shall stay," he had countered desperately. "I shall find employment in England. We shall find some way to be together here." But they both knew the futility of such plans. Tobias had obligations in Boston, a position waiting that would secure his future prosperity. In England, he could only ever be a servant, and Lavinia could never openly acknowledge an attachment to a man of such station without destroying both their lives. The crisis had been postponed when Tobias's uncle, responding to letters detailing the young man's excellent progress, had agreed to extend his time in England by an additional year. The reprieve had brought relief, mingled with a recognition that they were merely postponing the inevitable. Another year would not change the fundamental impossibility of their situation, yet Lavinia had accepted the gift of additional time with desperate gratitude. Another year to memorize the sound of Tobias's voice. Another year to collect moments that would have to sustain her through a lifetime of duty and appropriate marriage to a suitable gentleman. But even that extension had proven cruelly brief. The winter months had flown past in a blur of stolen kisses and increasingly anguished conversations. Spring arrived again with its promise of renewal, but for Lavinia, it brought only the approaching date of Tobias's departure and the growing pressure from her family to settle her future, which brought her to this March afternoon in 1820, standing in the drawing room with a letter in her hands and her mother's footsteps approaching. The Viscount was arriving to press his suit. Tobias had 3 months remaining before his ship sailed for Boston, and Lavinia stood at a crossroads where every path led to heartbreak. Lavinia! Her mother's voice cut through her thoughts as Lady Caroline entered the drawing room, her expression a mixture of excitement and determination. Why are you standing at the window in that distracted manner? The Viscount will arrive within the hour. You must prepare yourself. Lavinia turned slowly, the letter she had been reading now concealed in the folds of her gown. I am prepared, Mama. You need not worry on that account. Lady Caroline's sharp eyes missed nothing. You look pale and distracted. This is the most important evening of your life, child. Benedict Stratham, Viscount of Cheltenham, with £15,000 annually and 3 fine properties, is coming specifically to speak with your father, and we hope to formalize his intentions toward you. You must present yourself as the grateful, accomplished young lady you are. I understand my duty, Mama, Lavinia said quietly, though each word felt like a small death. I shall endeavor to conduct myself appropriately. Her mother's expression softened slightly. I know this is not the romantic attachment you might have dreamed of, Lavinia, but affection can grow within marriage. Lord Benedict is a respectable man, recently out of mourning for his late wife. He requires a competent mistress for his household, and eventually a mother for his future children. You would want for nothing as his Viscountess. Nothing except love, Lavinia thought, but did not say aloud. Nothing except the freedom to choose her own path. Nothing except the man her heart had selected, despite every rational objection. Has Lord Benedict actually proposed, or are we merely anticipating his intentions? Lavinia asked, seizing on this small technicality as though it might provide some escape route. His letters to your father have been most explicit, Lady Caroline replied firmly. He intends to make a formal offer this very evening. Your father is prepared to accept on your behalf, naturally, as the match is advantageous beyond anything we might reasonably have expected for you. The casual cruelty of that statement, delivered without malice, struck Lavinia like a physical blow. Her parents loved her, she knew, but their affection existed within the rigid framework of social expectations and economic realities. They genuinely believed they were securing her happiness by arranging an advantageous marriage to a wealthy peer. I should like to speak with Father before Lord Benedict arrives, Lavinia said, a desperate plan forming in her mind. Might I have a few moments with him privately? Her mother's expression grew suspicious. Whatever for? Everything is arranged, Lavinia. You need only present yourself agreeably and accept the Viscount's addresses with appropriate gratitude. Nevertheless, I should like to speak with him, Lavinia persisted, her tone leaving no room for further argument. It is a daughter's right, surely, to confer with her father on such a momentous occasion. Lady Caroline hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. Very well. He is in his study reviewing accounts. But do not tax him with foolish romantic notions, Lavinia. We are not positioned to indulge such luxuries. Lavinia found her father precisely where her mother had indicated, bent over ledgers that catalogued the estate's expenses and income. Baron Carrington looked up as she entered, his expression weary but affectionate. Lavinia, my dear, your mother has informed you of our expectations for this evening, I assume? Yes, Papa. She closed the study door behind her and approached his desk, her heart hammering against her ribs. I wished to speak with you before Lord Benedict's arrival, to ask whether you would truly force me into this marriage if I found it objectionable. Her father's face registered surprise, followed by concern. Force is a harsh word, daughter. We seek only to secure your future prosperity. Lord Benedict is a man of excellent character and substantial means. You could not hope for a better match. But what if I do not love him? The words burst from Lavinia before she could reconsider their wisdom. What if I cannot bear the thought of binding my life to his? Baron Carrington set down his pen and regarded his daughter with a mixture of sympathy and frustration. Love is not the foundation upon which sensible marriages are built, Lavinia. Respect, compatibility of station, and economic security. These are the elements that matter. Affection may develop over time, but it need not precede the union. And if it does not develop? Lavinia pressed, knowing she was treading on dangerous ground. If I find myself bound for life to a man I can never truly care for? Then you will have the consolation of position, comfort, and the respect of society, her father replied firmly. These are not insignificant compensations, Lavinia. Many women would gratefully accept such an arrangement. I'm not many women, Lavinia said quietly. I am your daughter. Does my happiness matter nothing in this calculation? Baron Carrington's expression softened, but his voice remained resolute. Your happiness matters greatly, which is precisely why this match is so important. Do you imagine you will be happier as an aging spinster, dependent on the charity of relatives? Or perhaps you envision some alternative future I cannot perceive? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Lavinia thought of the letter hidden in her gown, of Tobias's earnest plea that she abandon everything and flee with him to America. The fantasy that had seemed almost possible in the moonlit garden now appeared absurd in the harsh reality of her father's study. I merely wish to know whether I had any choice in this matter, Lavinia said finally, her voice hollow with resignation. You have answered that question adequately. You have the choice to accept graciously or to create a scandal that will benefit no one, her father replied bluntly. Those are the options available to you. I pray you will select the former. Lavinia retreated from the study with her father's words ringing in her ears. The house suddenly felt like a prison, its familiar corridors closing in around her. She needed air, space to think, to determine whether she possessed the courage that Tobias's proposal demanded. The afternoon hours crawled past with agonizing slowness. Lavinia submitted to her mother's ministrations, her hair arranged by a young, sympathetic-looking housemaid named Mary. As Mary worked, her hands briefly tightened on Lavinia's shoulder in a silent show of support, before retreating under Lady Caroline's sharp gaze. Lavinia allowed herself to be dressed in her finest evening gown. The woman reflected in her mirror looked poised and elegant, utterly at odds with the turmoil churning beneath the surface. Lord Benedict Stratham arrived precisely on time, as befitted a man of his methodical nature. Lavinia observed him from the top of the stairs as her father welcomed him into the entrance hall. The Viscount was tall and distinguished, his dark hair showing traces of grey at the temples. His bearing was impeccable, his manners irreproachable. He was, in every objective measure, an exemplary suitor. He was also entirely wrong for her in every way that mattered to her heart. The evening that followed unfolded with the mechanical precision of a carefully choreographed performance. Lavinia descended the stairs, accepted Lord Benedict's compliments with appropriate modesty, and took her place in the drawing-room where tea had been laid. She poured with practiced grace, contributed appropriately to the conversation, and displayed all the accomplishments her mother had drilled into her over years of preparation. Through it all, she felt as though she were watching herself from a great distance, observing the actions of a stranger who happened to occupy her body. The real Lavinia was somewhere else entirely, locked in memory of moonlit garden meetings and impossible dreams. Lady Lavinia, Lord Benedict said during a lull in the conversation, his tone suggesting he had rehearsed this moment carefully. I wonder if I might have the honor of speaking with you privately for a few moments, with your parents' permission, naturally. Baron and Lady Carrington exchanged significant glances, then nodded their assent. Lady Caroline rose from her seat, her expression practically radiating triumph. We shall step into the library, she announced. You may have a quarter hour, Lord Benedict. That should suffice for your purposes. Once her parents had departed, closing the door behind them, Lord Benedict turned to face Lavinia with an expression of earnest determination. He was, she realized, genuinely nervous about this moment, which made what was to come somehow worse. Lady Lavinia, I believe you know the purpose of my visit this evening, he began formally. I have spoken at length with your father, and he has given me reason to hope that my addresses will not be entirely unwelcome. You honor me with your regard, my lord, Lavinia replied, the words automatic and hollow. Lord Benedict took a step closer, his hands clasped behind his back in a military posture. I am a widower, as you know. My late wife passed 3 years ago, and I have completed my period of mourning. I now find myself in need of a companion to manage my household, and in time to provide heirs to my title. The clinical nature of the proposal struck Lavinia as almost comical in its lack of romance. Yet she recognized that Lord Benedict was simply being honest about the transactional nature of aristocratic marriage. At least he did not pretend to emotions he did not feel. You are young, he continued, warming to his topic. accomplished and of good family. My inquiries suggest that your temperament is equable and your understanding sound. I believe we could establish a marriage of mutual respect and satisfaction." "You speak of respect and satisfaction," Lavinia heard herself say, her voice surprisingly steady. "Do you speak also of affection, my lord? Of love?" Lord Benedict appeared taken aback by the question. "I speak of the foundation upon which successful marriages are built, Lady Lavinia. Affection is a pleasant addition when it occurs, but it is not essential to a proper union. I offer you security, position, and all the comforts my rank and fortune can provide. Is that not sufficient?" "For many women, I am certain it would be more than sufficient," Lavinia replied carefully. "You are generous to offer such advantages to someone of my relatively modest station." "Then I may hope for a favorable response," Lord Benedict pressed, clearly eager to conclude the business. "Your father has already expressed his approval. I need only your consent to make the arrangement official." The moment had arrived. Lavinia stood at the precipice of decision, knowing that her next words would determine the entire course of her future. She thought of her parents' expectations, of the security and status that Lord Benedict offered. She thought of her duty to her family, of the practical realities that governed women's lives, and then she thought of Tobias, of moonlight on his face, and impossible dreams of American freedom. She thought of genuine laughter and conversations that fed her soul, rather than merely filling time. She thought of love, freely given, rather than obligation, dutifully fulfilled. "My lord, you honor me beyond measure," she said slowly, each word a stone dropping into still water. "But I must beg your indulgence in allowing me time to consider such a momentous decision. Might I have a day to compose my thoughts before providing you with an answer?" Lord Benedict's expression shifted from confidence to confusion, then to barely suppressed irritation. "A day? Lady Lavinia, I have made my intentions clear to your parents. Your father has assured me that my suit would be welcomed. What possible need is there for additional consideration?" "The need of a heart that must reconcile itself to an irreversible commitment," Lavinia replied, surprised by her own boldness. "Surely you would not wish to bind yourself to a wife who enters the union with reservations and doubts." The argument was calculated to appeal to Lord Benedict's pride, and it achieved its purpose. His expression softened slightly, though irritation still lingered around the edges. "Very well," he conceded stiffly. "I shall return tomorrow evening for your answer. But I must caution you, Lady Lavinia, that such an advantageous offer may not present itself again should you refuse it. I trust you will weigh that consideration carefully in your deliberations." The threat was thinly veiled but unmistakable. Refuse Lord Benedict, and she would bear the stigma of rejecting a superior match, likely condemning herself to spinsterhood and social diminishment. After the Viscount's departure, Lavinia faced her parents' anger and bewilderment. Her mother was particularly incensed at what she perceived as her daughter's ingratitude and foolishness. "What more time do you require?" Lady Caroline demanded, her voice sharp with frustration. "The man offers you everything a sensible woman could desire. What further consideration is necessary?" "I merely wish to be certain of my own feelings," Lavinia replied wearily. "Surely that is not unreasonable when contemplating a lifelong commitment." "Your feelings are a luxury we cannot afford," her mother retorted. "You have had 3 seasons with increasingly disappointing results. Lord Benedict represents your best and perhaps final opportunity to secure a respectable future. I cannot fathom what you imagine you are preserving by delaying your acceptance." Lavinia had no answer that would satisfy her mother without revealing the truth that would destroy everything. She retreated to her chambers as soon as propriety allowed, her mind churning with impossible calculations. That night, she met Tobias in their accustomed spot in the garden, and the moment she saw his face, the precarious control she had maintained throughout the evening shattered. She went to him without speaking, and he gathered her into his arms, holding her as tears she had been suppressing finally broke free. "It has happened then," Tobias said quietly against her hair. "Your parents have accepted an offer for you." "How did you know?" Lavinia asked, pulling back slightly to look at his face in the moonlight. "The entire household has been aware of the Viscount's intentions for weeks," he replied grimly. We servants always know the family business before the family does. I have been dreading this moment. He proposed this evening, Lavinia confirmed, her voice breaking. My parents expect me to accept tomorrow. They cannot understand why I would hesitate to embrace such an advantageous match. Will you accept? Tobias asked, though the pain in his voice suggested he already knew the answer she was expected to give. I do not know, Lavinia admitted, the honesty of the statement surprising even herself. Every practical consideration demands that I do so. Every obligation I owe my parents argues for acceptance, yet my heart rebels against the very thought. Tobias cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle despite the intensity of his expression. Then listen to your heart, Lavinia. Come away with me. We leave for Boston in 3 months. Come with me. Choose love over duty, freedom over obligation. You make it sound simple, Lavinia said, tears streaming down her face, as though I could simply abandon everything I have ever known, everyone who depends upon me, for an uncertain future in a foreign land. It is not simple, Tobias acknowledged. It is the most difficult choice you will ever face, but is a lifetime of regret, bound to a man you can never truly love, truly the better alternative. Will you look back from 50 years hence and be grateful for the safety you chose, or will you wish you had possessed the courage to seize happiness when it was offered? The questions haunted Lavinia through a sleepless night and into the following day. She moved through her morning routine mechanically, her mind occupied with impossible calculations of risk and reward, duty and desire. By afternoon, she had reached no clarity. The rational arguments all favored accepting Lord Benedict's proposal. She would secure her family's approval, maintain her social standing, and live in comfort, if not happiness. The alternative Tobias offered was madness, a leap into the unknown that would brand her as scandalous, ungrateful, and mad. Yet when she attempted to imagine the life that would follow acceptance of Lord Benedict's proposal, her imagination failed utterly. She could not picture herself as Viscountess Cheltenham, could not envision a future where she woke each morning beside a man she respected but did not love, where she raised children in a household devoid of genuine affection. When she tried instead to imagine life with Tobias in America, the vision came with startling clarity. She saw herself standing beside him in some bustling American city, working together to build something of their own creation. She saw laughter and struggle in equal measure, saw hardship balanced by genuine partnership. She saw a life that would be entirely her own, chosen rather than prescribed. The realization crystallized with sudden, breathtaking certainty. She had been approaching the decision incorrectly, weighing what she owed others against what she desired for herself. But the true question was simpler and more profound. Did she possess the courage to claim her own life, or would she allow fear and obligation to determine her fate? When Lord Benedict arrived that evening, Lavinia met him in the drawing room with her parents present. Her mother's expression radiated expectation and barely suppressed triumph. Her father looked weary but satisfied, clearly anticipating a positive resolution to the previous evening's uncertainty. Lady Lavinia, Lord Benedict began formally, I trust you have had adequate time to consider my proposal. I am prepared to hear your decision. Lavinia rose from her seat, her hands clasped tightly before her to prevent their trembling from being observed. This was the moment that would define the remainder of her existence. Once the words were spoken, there would be no possibility of reclaiming them. Lord Benedict, you have honored me greatly with your proposal, she began, her voice steadier than she had expected. Any woman would be fortunate to receive such an offer from a man of your character and position. She saw her mother's expression begin to relax, saw relief start to dawn on her father's face. Lord Benedict himself straightened slightly, confident of the acceptance he anticipated. However, Lavinia continued, and the word landed like a cannon shot in the quiet room, I find I cannot in good conscience accept your generous offer. My heart and affections are already engaged elsewhere, and it would be dishonorable to enter into a marriage while harboring such sentiments. The silence that followed her declaration was absolute and terrible. Lord Benedict's face cycled through expressions of disbelief, humiliation, and finally cold anger. Her mother appeared frozen, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly. Only her father seemed capable of speech, and his words emerged in a tone Lavinia had never heard him use before. "Lavinia, you cannot possibly mean this. You do not know what you are saying." "I know precisely what I am saying, Father," she replied, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I am refusing Lord Benedict's proposal because accepting it would be a betrayal of everything I have come to understand about the nature of true partnership and genuine affection." Lord Benedict found his voice, and it emerged sharp with wounded pride. "May I inquire as to the identity of this prior attachment that prevents your acceptance of my proposal? I was not aware you were being courted by anyone, and I certainly would not have pursued my suit had I known your affections were engaged." Lavinia met his gaze steadily, knowing that complete honesty would likely cause an even greater scandal than her simple refusal. "The identity of the gentleman is not material to this discussion, my lord. I regret any inconvenience or embarrassment my decision may cause you, but I cannot enter into a marriage founded on falsehood." "This is absurd," her mother finally managed, her voice rising with each word. "Lavinia, go to your room immediately. We shall discuss this privately, and then you will return and offer Lord Benedict the apology and acceptance he deserves." "I shall not change my decision, Mamma," Lavinia said quietly but firmly. "I am sorry to disappoint you, truly I am, but I cannot sacrifice my entire future happiness to satisfy expectations I never agreed to embrace." Lord Benedict rose abruptly, his dignity wounded but still intact. "Baron Carrington, Lady Carrington, I believe this conversation has concluded. Lady Lavinia has made her position clear, and I have no wish to remain where I am so clearly unwanted. I bid you good evening." After the Viscount's departure, the confrontation that Lavinia had been dreading erupted with full force. Her parents' anger was both expected and devastating. Her mother wept with fury and humiliation, while her father's disappointment cut deeper than any harsh words could have done. "You have disgraced this family," Lady Caroline declared through her tears. "You have thrown away your best chance at a respectable future for some romantic fancy that exists only in your imagination. When you are 30 and unmarried, dependent on the charity of relatives, perhaps then you will understand the magnitude of your foolishness." "Who is this man who has poisoned your mind against your duty?" Baron Carrington demanded. "What gentleman has been courting you without my knowledge or permission?" Lavinia remained silent, knowing that revealing Tobias's identity would only compound the disaster. Her parents might dismiss her refusal of Lord Benedict as youthful foolishness, but they would never forgive or accept an attachment to a servant, however temporary his position. "I insist you tell me," her father pressed, his voice hard with authority. "If there is indeed another suitor, he must be made to declare his intentions and face my judgment." "There is no formal suitor, father," Lavinia replied carefully. "Only the certain knowledge in my own heart that I cannot marry where I do not love." The argument continued for hours, cycling through anger, recriminations, and finally, exhausted resignation. Her parents could not force her to accept Lord Benedict's proposal, but they made clear that she would face the consequences of her decision. She would not be presented for another season. She would remain at Carrington Hall in disgrace until such time as she regained her senses or resigned herself to a life of unmarried dependence. Lavinia bore it all in silence, knowing that the true test of her courage was still to come. Refusing Lord Benedict was merely the first step. Now she must determine whether she possessed the strength to take the far more terrifying leap that Tobias had proposed. That night, she met him in the garden one final time. The spring air was soft and fragrant with new growth, a mockery of the turmoil churning in her heart. "I refused him," she said without preamble, as Tobias gathered her close. "I could not accept his proposal, knowing how I feel about you." She felt the tension leave his body as relief washed through him. "Thank God. I have been in agony all day, imagining you bound to that man while I sailed away to America. But refusing him is not the same as choosing you," Lavinia said, pulling back to meet his eyes. "Tobias, you must understand what you are asking of me. If I flee with you to America, I will lose everything. My family will disown me. I will be branded as scandalous, ungrateful, possibly mad. There will be no returning from such a choice." "I know," Tobias replied seriously. I would never ask this of you lightly, Lavinia, but I also know that I cannot imagine a future that does not include you. I love you. I have loved you since that first afternoon in the library when you asked me about America with such genuine curiosity in your eyes. I will love you for the remainder of my life, whether you come with me or not. How would we even accomplish it? Lavinia asked, allowing herself for the first time to seriously consider the practicalities. I have no funds of my own. We could not simply walk away together. I have been making arrangements, Tobias admitted. I have saved nearly all my wages from the past 2 years. It is not a fortune, but it is sufficient to secure our passage to Boston and support us until I can establish myself in my uncle's business. We would have to travel separately to avoid suspicion, then meet at the port. It would require careful planning and considerable courage, but it is possible. He hesitated, then continued with evident difficulty. You must understand, Lavinia, that I risk everything as well. My uncle has warned me that any scandal attached to this position would result in my complete disinheritance. If our elopement becomes known before we reach Boston, I will lose my place in the business entirely. We would truly be starting with nothing, dependent solely on whatever work I could secure. Lavinia stared at him, the magnitude of his words settling upon her. He was not merely offering her passage to his world, he was offering to sacrifice his own world entirely for her. This shared risk, this equity of ruin, bound them more tightly than any vow. It was not his security she craved, but his courage. Lavinia listened as he outlined the plan he had been secretly developing, the escape route he had prepared in case she proved willing to take the risk. The fact that he had gone to such lengths, had planned so meticulously despite having no certainty she would agree, moved her profoundly. "When must I decide?" she asked finally. "The ship sails from Portsmouth in 8 weeks, Tobias replied. "I have secured 2 passages under false names. We would need to leave Carrington Hall separately, then meet at a coaching inn I have selected. From there, we would travel to Portsmouth as man and wife. By the time your family realizes you are gone, we would be at sea. 8 weeks. Lavinia had 8 weeks to gather her courage, to determine whether the promise of love and freedom in an unknown land outweighed the security and respectability she would be abandoning. The weeks that followed were both torment and revelation. Her mother, humiliated by the public refusal and furious at her daughter's inexplicable defiance, confined Lavinia to the estate and rarely let her out of sight. Gone were the casual walks in the garden, the hours spent alone in the library, any semblance of privacy or freedom. Lady Caroline supervised every moment, determined to prevent whatever mysterious attachment had poisoned her daughter's judgment. Lavinia's direct interactions with Tobias ceased entirely. They could not risk even the briefest exchange under her mother's watchful eye. Their careful planning was now relegated to coded messages passed through Mary, the young housemaid who pitied Lavinia's circumstances and possessed a romantic heart of her own. Every preparation became 100 times more perilous, every hidden item a potential disaster if discovered. Lavinia existed in a state of near constant tension, her mind occupied with clandestine preparations, even as she maintained a facade of chastened submission to her parents' anger. Her father treated her with cold disappointment, while her mother alternated between fury and attempts at persuasion, certain that time and isolation would restore Lavinia to proper thinking. She began quietly gathering items she could take with her, slipping them into her trunk during the brief moments when her mother was occupied elsewhere. Nothing too obvious, nothing that would be missed during the daily inspections Lady Caroline now conducted. A few pieces of jewelry that had been gifts from her grandmother, hidden beneath layers of undergarments. Several practical garments that could be adapted for travel, claimed as items requiring mending. Letters and small personal items that held sentimental value, secreted away with painstaking care. Each item she managed to hide felt like another step across a bridge from which there would be no return. Yet with each passing day, despite the suffocating supervision, her conviction grew stronger. She was choosing her own destiny, claiming agency over her life in a way that few women of her station ever achieved. Tobias maintained his duties as footman with impeccable professionalism, giving no external sign of the conspiracy they were conducting. His carefully neutral demeanor as he served at table, the complete absence of any improper glance or gesture, protected them both from suspicion. Only through Mary's whispered reports did Lavinia learn that all preparations continued according to plan, that their escape remained possible despite the new obstacles. "Are you certain?" Mary had whispered one evening, delivering one of Tobias's coded messages, her eyes wide with concern. "Once you board that ship, my lady, there will be no undoing this choice. Mr. Brigham asks whether you have any doubts, any reservations." Lavinia had written her response carefully, knowing these messages were her only connection to Tobias during these imprisoned weeks. "I am terrified," she had penned in careful script. "I am abandoning everything familiar for a future I cannot predict. But I am also more certain of this than I have ever been of anything in my life. I choose him. I choose love over duty, freedom over safety, happiness over respectability." The appointed day arrived with cruel swiftness. Lavinia woke before dawn, her small bag of essentials hidden at the back of her wardrobe. Through her window, she could see the first pale light of morning beginning to paint the eastern sky in shades of rose and grey. This was the last sunrise she would witness from this room, the chamber that had been hers since childhood. Every object around her carried memories: the writing desk where she had composed countless letters, the mirror where she had practiced becoming the lady society expected, the window seat where she had spent hours reading and dreaming. The greatest challenge would be escaping her mother's vigilance. Lady Caroline had taken to sleeping with her door ajar, positioned to hear any movement from Lavinia's adjoining chamber. But Mary had provided the solution, a sleeping draught mixed into Lady Caroline's evening tea the night before. Lavinia recoiled at the necessity of such a measure, but knew her mother's desperate vigilance left no other path to freedom. The draught would ensure deep slumber during the critical hours of dawn. She dressed in her most practical traveling clothes, layers that would serve her well for the journey ahead. Her hands trembled as she performed these final preparations, equal parts terror and exhilaration coursing through her veins. Each button she fastened felt like another small act of rebellion against everything she had been taught to value. Each garment she donned represented another step away from Lady Lavinia Carrington and towards simply Lavinia, a woman choosing her own destiny. She had left a letter for her parents, begging forgiveness for a choice she could not regret, sealing it with a hand that trembled with both fear and conviction. The words had been inadequate to encompass what she was doing, but they were all she could offer. The house was still dark and quiet when she crept down the servants' staircase, the route Tobias had planned for her. Her heart hammered so violently she feared it would wake the entire household. Each creak of the floorboard seemed impossibly loud in the pre-dawn silence. Tobias was waiting for her in the shadows near the garden gate, his own small traveling case in hand. When their eyes met, Lavinia saw in his face the same mixture of fear and determination that burned in her own breast. "Last chance to change your mind," he whispered, as they slipped through the gate and onto the road beyond. "Say the word, and I will return you to your room. No one need ever know you were gone." "Keep moving," Lavinia replied, her voice steady despite the trembling of her limbs. "I have made my choice, and I will not retreat from it now." They walked through the darkness toward the coaching inn, where they would board the public coach for the first leg of their journey. Each step took Lavinia further from everything she had known, but also closer to a future she had chosen for herself. By the time the sun rose, painting the English countryside in shades of gold and pink, they were well away from Carrington Hall. Lavinia looked back only once, memorizing the distant silhouette of her family home, knowing she might never see it again. "Regrets?" Tobias asked softly, following her gaze. "Sadness," Lavinia corrected, "but not regret. There is a difference." The journey to Portsmouth was long and uncomfortable, the public coaches crowded and slow. They traveled as man and wife, using the false names Tobias had prepared. Lavinia found herself constantly alert for discovery, convinced that every stranger who glanced their way was somehow connected to her family, sent to drag her back to face her disgrace. But no pursuit materialized. They reached Portsmouth without incident, securing lodging in a modest inn near the docks. The ship that would carry them to America loomed large in the harbor, its masts stark against the grey English sky. "2 days until we sail," Tobias told her, as they stood at the window of their inn-room watching the preparations below. Are you still certain, Lavinia? Once we board that vessel, there will truly be no returning. Lavinia turned to face him, taking both his hands in hers. I have never been more certain of anything. Whatever awaits us in America, we will face it together. That is enough for me. On the morning they were to board, Lavinia woke with a strange sense of peace settling over her. She was leaving behind security, respectability, and familial approval, but she was gaining something far more precious, the right to live authentically, to choose her own path, to love freely without constraint. The crossing was rough, the Atlantic living up to its reputation for unpredictable moods. Lavinia spent the first week miserably seasick, barely able to leave the tiny cabin they shared. But gradually her body adjusted to the ship's motion, and she emerged onto the deck to find Tobias waiting with a smile of pure relief. I was beginning to fear I would lose you to seasickness before we even reached Boston, he teased gently, steadying her as the ship rolled beneath them. I am made of sterner stuff than that, Lavinia replied, though her legs felt decidedly unsteady. Show me America, or at least the ocean that separates me from England. They were married by the ship's captain in a simple ceremony, witnessed by a handful of fellow passengers. Lavinia wore her best dress, though it was rumpled from weeks of travel. Tobias had no ring to offer, but the promises they exchanged felt more binding than any formal ceremony could have achieved. I promise to honor you, Tobias said solemnly, his hands warm around hers as the ship rose and fell beneath them. To cherish you, to build a life with you that justifies the enormous sacrifice you have made. I promise that you will never regret choosing love over duty. I promise to be your partner in all things, Lavinia replied, tears streaming down her face. To face whatever challenges await us with courage and determination. I promise that I will never resent the choice I have made, because choosing you was choosing myself. The final weeks of the crossing passed in a strange suspension between worlds. Lavinia was no longer English, not yet American. She existed in the liminal space of the ocean, neither here nor there, recreating herself with each nautical mile. Land appeared on the horizon one misty morning in late May. Boston Harbor materialized out of the fog like something from a dream, bustling and foreign and full of promise. The city stretched before them, a jumble of buildings quite different from English towns. Church steeples pierced the sky, wharves extended into the water, and everywhere there was movement, energy, the palpable sense of a place being constantly remade. The sounds that drifted across the water were distinctly American, sharp consonants and flattened vowels multiplied by hundreds of voices calling, shouting, laughing. The accents varied wildly, evidence of America's diverse population, mingling with the sharp, unfamiliar scents of salt water, fresh sawn timber, and tar. It was the smell of industry and effort, a stark contrast to the perfumed gardens of Carrington Hall. This was not England's carefully stratified society. This was something altogether different, something both thrilling and slightly terrifying. Welcome home, Tobias said softly, his arm around Lavinia's shoulders as they stood at the rail watching the approaching shore. She could feel the emotion in his voice, the relief of a man returning to familiar territory after 2 years abroad, mixed with anxiety about how that territory would receive his unexpected bride. Our home now, our fresh beginning. Lavinia leaned into his embrace, watching America draw closer with each passing moment. The land of new beginnings, of choices freely made, of futures built rather than inherited. She had sacrificed everything familiar to reach this point. Now she would discover whether the gamble had been worth the price. The first years in Boston were harder than either had anticipated. Tobias's uncle, while welcoming him back, had been less enthusiastic about his unexpected bride, particularly given the scandal's circumstances. But Boston was not London. In America, past scandals mattered less than present character and future potential. Tobias proved as capable in business as his uncle had hoped, working long hours to establish himself and provide for the wife who had given up everything to stand beside him. For her part, Lavinia discovered resources within herself she had never known existed. She established herself as a teacher of young ladies, offering instruction in deportment, music, and literature. Her English refinement proved an asset rather than a liability. The money she earned helped supplement their modest income during those early years when every penny counted. They lived simply, in modest lodgings that would have horrified Lavinia's mother, but with a freedom and authenticity impossible within English society's rigid constraints. They were building something together, creating a life entirely of their own design. The first child arrived in autumn of 1822, a daughter they named Hope. Lavinia held her infant daughter and wept with joy, knowing this child would grow up free from the restrictive expectations that had nearly crushed her own spirit. 2 more children followed, filling their home with noise and laughter. Tobias's business continued to grow, eventually expanding beyond his uncle's firm. They moved to a larger house, still modest by the standards Lavinia had known, but spacious enough for their family and infinitely precious because it was wholly their own. Sometimes, in quiet moments, Lavinia would think of her parents and wonder whether they had ever forgiven her. She would never know that her mother, upon finding the letter that morning, had not screamed but had collapsed, her cold fury finally breaking into a single, desolate sob for the daughter she had lost. She would never know that her father had read the letter once, set it down carefully on his desk, and stared into the empty fireplace for an entire day, his face a mask of iron, before forbidding his wife ever to speak their daughter's name again. Her letters, when they began to arrive months later, were burned unopened. She had written to them several times in the early years, attempting to explain and seeking some form of reconciliation. But her letters had gone unanswered, and eventually she had ceased sending them, accepting that the bridge she had burned was not to be rebuilt. The pain of that estrangement never fully disappeared, but neither did she regret the choice that had necessitated it. She had chosen love over duty, authenticity over propriety, and she had built a life that was wholly her own. That was worth the price she had paid. 10 years after their arrival in Boston, Lavinia stood in the front garden of their home, watching her 3 children play in the summer sunshine. Tobias emerged from the house to join her, his arm settling naturally around her waist as they observed their offspring's energetic game. "Do you ever regret it?" Tobias asked quietly, the question he posed periodically, always with a trace of anxiety that she might one day answer differently. Lavinia turned to look at her husband, this man who had given her the courage to claim her own life. His face showed the lines that 10 years of hard work and responsibility had carved there, but his eyes still held the same warmth and intelligence that had first captured her attention in the library at Carrington Hall. "Never," she replied firmly, as she always did. "Not for a single moment. This life, this family, this freedom to be wholly myself, these are worth more than all the comfort and respectability I left behind." "Even when things were hardest," Tobias pressed, "even during those first years when we barely had enough, when society looked at you with suspicion and judgment." "Even then," Lavinia confirmed, "because even in hardship, I was with you. I was choosing my own path rather than walking one prescribed by others. That made all the difference." Their eldest daughter called out to them, demanding that they observe some accomplishment in her play. Lavinia waved acknowledgement, then looked back at Tobias with a smile that reflected 10 years of shared struggles and triumphs. "Besides," she added with a mischievous gleam in her eye, "I find our story impresses people here far more than it scandalized them in England. The Americans seem to admire audacity more than they condemn impropriety." Tobias laughed, pulling her closer. "My scandalous bride. The lady who chose a footman over a viscount and has been shocking people ever since." As the afternoon sun painted everything in shades of gold, Lavinia Brigham, formerly Lady Lavinia Carrington, reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. She had sacrificed the ease and security that Lord Benedict would have provided. She had lost her family's approval and her place in English society. She had crossed an ocean and rebuilt her life from nothing in a foreign land. And she would not change a single decision, for each sacrifice had purchased something far more valuable: the freedom to love authentically, to live by her own rules, to build a future limited only by her courage and determination. She had chosen the uncertain path over the prescribed one, and that choice had made all the difference. Dear listener, there comes a moment in every life when we must choose between the safe path others have laid before us and the uncertain road our hearts compel us to walk. Like Lavinia, You may face a crossroads where duty and desire pull you in opposite directions, where the sensible choice conflicts with the one that will nourish your soul. Society will always have opinions about how you should live, what choices you should make, which dreams you should abandon in favor of stability and respectability. But those voices, however loud and insistent, do not have to live with the consequences of your decisions. Only you will wake each morning with your choices. Only you will look back from the end of your life and evaluate whether you lived authentically or simply existed within boundaries others drew for you. Your happiness matters. Your dreams are valid. The love you feel, the life you envision, the path that calls to you even when it terrifies you, these are not foolish fantasies to be dismissed, but profound truths to be honored. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is trust our own hearts over the collective wisdom that tells us to settle, to be practical, to choose safety over authenticity. Tonight, as you consider your own crossroads, know that you possess the courage to choose your own path. The life you truly want may require sacrifice, may demand more courage than you believe you possess, but it is waiting for you nonetheless. Like Lavinia, you have the strength to build something beautiful from an audacious choice. Thank you so most for staying with us until the end. If this story of courage and authentic love touched your heart, please subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Your support helps us continue creating stories that celebrate the brave choices that transform lives.